All right, we're going to only be talking about woody ornamentals for the landscape. So in this one, I've got mostly trees, shrubs, and I've got a few woody vines. And a lot of these I've seen in Tennessee gardens, and I think they merit a spot in Tennessee's landscapes. And some of the commonly used plants, we're seeing some issues with them. And I hate to even say this name, Leland cypress. That's probably the number one plant I get calls on. One of the top 5 plants I get calls on is this rose right here, a knockout rose. They're having some issues with rose rosette virus, which is spread by a mite that kind of blows through the wind. And we're seeing some issues with basically some of the plants being overplanted in certain areas, and they kind of, once one gets it, they all kind of get it together. So we kind of discourage a lot of mass plantings. We always encourage something with diversity in the landscape. So that was a rose. And if you've got knockout roses, you may have seen something like this already. This is rose rosette. I took that picture last year because roses are probably one of the more commonly asked questions that I get. What's wrong with my rose? Why is my rose dying? As we kind of jump in this, maybe. We see woody ornamentals planted all over the place, and we see them in a lot of bad areas. Theoretically, if we put the right woody ornamental in the right spot, we really shouldn't have to prune it. Sometimes people have the mindset, if I plant it, well, then I got to prune it every year. No, that's not always the case. Not every plant has to be pruned every year. Now, I understand there's going to be some things for cosmetic issues. There's going to be some issues with maybe crossing branches. I understand there's going to be some issues with maybe some bug damage or something like that. There are some pruning maintenance type things, but it's not an every year thing. The plant on the right is a Bradford pear, and the plant on the right was a plant I took in downtown Gallenberg last year. I would assume these were green giant arborvitaes. Green giant arborvitaes get anywhere from 10, 15 feet wide. They're planted in a little bitty gully that's about 18 inches wide. So I kind of think, what's that going to look like in 10 years? As the homeowner or the landscaper, we need to go ahead and have in the back of our heads, these plants grow. And ideally, if we want to get something that stays 4 feet tall in our landscape, buy something that stays theoretically 4 feet tall. And I'll mention that theoretically in just a few minutes. I'm going to show you some plants that did not read their tags and got a little bit bigger than what they actually said. But we need to realize that all of these woody ornamentals grow, and then whenever we put them in the wrong spot, that's when we have some maintenance type issues. And I'm just going to jump in, and I've kind of broken this up into shrubs, vines, and I've got some conifer type things at the end, and I have some deciduous trees at the end. I love hydrangeas, and I think Tennessee gardens need hydrangeas, but we need to kind of keep them relative to the situation. Some hydrangeas prefer to be in some shade in the afternoon. Some hydrangeas prefer to be in some sun all day, and some of them bloom on old wood. Some of them bloom on new wood. Some of them you prune in the wintertime. Some of them you prune in the summertime. We need to know what type of hydrangea there are that we have in our landscape before we actually go about pruning it and things like that. If you don't know, just ask me. I'll be glad to help you with any of these things. So the UT Gardens in Jackson bought all these hydrangea paniculata cultivars. Now, hydrangea paniculatas are the ones that like full sun. These are the ones that bloom on new wood, so in the late winter, early spring, we can go back and trim these if we need to actually cut back all those old blooms off. And I wanted to highlight some of my favorite ones. So Jason Reeves out in West Tennessee bought a huge collection of all the different ones he could find a few years ago, planted them all out in rows in blazing hot sun. And I wanted to show you the ones that I thought looked the best. And I've got some other ones that I've grown in previous homes that I thought really looked well. This one is baby lace. Now, baby lace is anywhere from 5 to 6 feet tall. The blooms are able to hold themselves up pretty nicely. One of my favorite little ones is little lime. Little lime, hydrangea paniculata, it blooms on new wood. It's kind of a dwarf version of limelight, and limelight was the one that kind of swept all landscaping companies by storm, and it was planted all over the place. But what they didn't realize, that limelight hydrangea, anywhere from 9, 10, 11 feet tall. It is not a small plant. Now, little lime has smaller blooms. It's a smaller growth habit, anywhere from 4 to 6 feet. So if you have a limelight near your house and you're always having to cut it back, you may replace it with little lime. Now, I want to tell you the blooms are smaller. They do have that greenish hue to them. But this was one in a previous home that I had a few years ago, and I really enjoyed this little hydrangea. Phantom is probably the one that I enjoy the most because it has the largest blooms of any paniculata that I've seen. Full sun hydrangea. These blooms are a little bit smaller than a girl's basketball. And this plant is planted at my mother's house. It's been there anywhere from 12 to 13 years. It gets around 10 feet tall. It's right in the middle of my mother's front yard. We've got some daylily beds around the front of it. You can see that grass in the background. That's peppermint sticks, giant reed grass, or arundo donax. But this hydrangea, it kind of merits attention. So you don't need to actually plant this probably near your house. It needs to be in a big open spot where it can get really large. So Phantom is a large hydrangea. And I like this one also, so whenever the blooms start to fade, they kind of get to a soft pink. Another one that was really good in the UT trials in Jackson was Silver Dollar. Now, Silver Dollar is a smaller one. It has a more whitish type bloom. The blooms hold themselves upright, and they're pretty much a really full bloom. The blooms are smaller. Silver Dollar, 5 or 6 feet tall. Kind of moving on to some of the plants that prefer to be in the shade. So those first hydrangeas, the hydrangea paniculatas, they like full sun. They can be grown in some shade, but you're going to get the full effects of their blooms if they're in full sun. So a lot of these full sun-loving plants, if they're grown in shade, they don't develop enough blooms. The oak leaf hydrangeas, if you've got a lot of shade, oak leaf hydrangeas are native to understory of trees kind of in the southeast. One of my favorite ones that I've seen is ruby slippers. Now, ruby slippers is an oak leaf hydrangea. It opens up white, and then it turns to a really bright pink. And this was actually bred in Tennessee. And the lady who bred it also released another one called Munchkin. And Munchkin was an open pollinated seedling of one called Sykes Dwarf. And it only gets anywhere from 3 or 4 feet tall. So if you've got a really small shady spot in the landscape, you may consider Munchkin. If you've got a larger spot in the landscape, you may consider ruby slippers. Now, this one was under some really large trees. You can kind of see in the background. It's under some pretty tall crepe myrtles, and there were some larger oak trees basically on this side of it, shading it out. I don't think it really got any direct sunlight whatsoever. My favorite oak leaf hydrangea is this little golden one in the back called Little Honey. Now, Little Honey oak leaf hydrangea, if it gets a lot of sun, it's so yellow it'll actually burn. If it gets a lot of shade, it'll kind of go to a pukey green color. So it kind of prefers a little morning sun, afternoon shade. And it's not the most florific, but it does bloom. But really what we're growing it for are these yellow leaves. Here was a smaller one. I wanted to show you what it looks like after about 5 years. So when I taught high school at Riverdale High School in Murfreesboro, we landscaped a lot of the beds, and we would get a lot of these plants in for the kids to plant and kind of mess around with. So we planted this one under a big Foster holly, and it pretty much did not get any sun whatsoever. The Foster holly was about 20 or 25 feet tall, and it was absolutely enormous. This is what it looked like last year whenever I went to go visit some graduating seniors. This was after about 5 years. It was a knockout. It's about 5 feet tall. The leaves were bright yellow, and it was fixing to bloom. If I would have waited a couple more weeks to go, excuse me, I would have been able to see this thing in full bloom. It really had some nice heavy blooms laying on top of it. And I wished I would have went back a couple of weeks later just to drive back to Murfreesboro to look at it. But this was grown in Rutherford County. This was about 5 years old. One other oak leaf hydrangea is Snowflake. Now, Snowflake is a double hose and hose flowering one, and what's so great about it is the plant, the blooms are so long and so heavy, whenever the plant gets 6 or 8 feet tall, it blooms, the plant looks like it's weeping. I've seen a lot of these at Cheekwood, and they really did look well against some kind of rock terraces in the gardens there, and I thought they looked great because when the plant got really large, it just looked like it was weeping. Hydrangea arborescens is another species. So we talked about the hydrangea paniculatas, the first ones that prefer full sun. The oak leaf hydrangeas prefer some shade. This is a hydrangea arborescens. It also prefers some shade. You can kind of see in the back, it's under a larger shade tree right there. This one is called Hayes Starburst. Hydrangea arborescens are the native hydrangeas that we see. We're probably really familiar with one called Annabelle. The issue with Annabelle, it can get so tall, the blooms get really heavy, and we get a nice rain shower. Those blooms fill up with water, and it just lays the blooms on the ground. Hayes Starburst stays shorter, anywhere from 3 to 4 feet tall. The blooms are double, but it will kind of have that spindly growth sometimes if we get a lot of rain. So sometimes it will lay on the ground also. But this was a little bit of a shorter cultivar, and it's a double flowering one. Now that was kind of some of my favorite hydrangeas going through. I'm going to jump into some other trees and shrubs and vines, and if you got any questions, put them in the chat box. I love quinces, and they're in a family called Caenomales speciosa. Now these quinces are not a real quince. A real quince is a fruiting plant called Cydonia. This is actually a flowering quince, so they actually can produce a small kind of inedible type fruit. But what I like about these things in the springtime, they're one of the first shrubs to bloom. This is a newer series called Double Take, Scarlet Storm, and on the right, Double Take Orange Storm. And there's also a Double Take Peach Storm and a Double Take Pink Storm, excuse me. A lot of the older quinces have thorns. What's great about these newer ones is they're thornless. They're one of the first things to bloom in the springtime. I've got some great pictures of these things blooming with snow on them. They can get anywhere from 5 to 6 feet tall, and I know some people say, well, they only bloom for a few weeks in the springtime. This is a tough as nails plant. Whenever you see some of these older homesteads where the house is falling down, you still see their quinces blooming in their landscape, along with their daffodils and their forsythia. We still see the quinces as kind of one of those old southern type plants that have lived, tons of years. Well, these are thornless, but kind of show you the size difference. This is my hand. The top one is the old-fashioned quince. The bottom one is the newer double takes. That's actually orange storm. So just to show you, the bloom's about 4 times the size. It's a double bloom, and what's even better is it's thornless. So you can buy these pretty much in any box store. They prefer full sun, but they will grow in afternoon shade. I love butterfly bushes, and a lot of the newer butterfly bushes stay shorter. So we've seen a lot of the older butterfly bushes get really large, and they get really gangly, and they get thin. They don't really look the best. Some of these newer ones stay shorter, anywhere from 36 to 48 inches tall. This is called the Buzz series. This is Buzz Hot Raspberry, and this is Buzz Ivory. You can kind of see, I took these pictures in the middle of August. This was in Cumberland County at their trial gardens at the UT Gardens there. And I was kind of taken back at how well a butterfly bush looked at the end of summer. That's kind of been beat up by July. It's gotten beat up by the first few weeks of August, and these things were killer, and they looked fantastic. And we're always worried about our pollinators. This is a plant that kind of blooms in the heat of summer when some of the other things are starting to go down. This is a little plant that likes a lot of shade. It does need a couple of hours of sun in the morning if you can get it. This is Fothergilla called Blue Shadow. Now, Blue Shadow Fothergilla can get anywhere from 5 to 6 feet tall. It has a white flower in the springtime that resembles a button bush. But what's great about it is the fall color on this. So that right picture is a little blurry, but the left picture is a little blurry. The right picture is a close-up of the foliage. It is a beautiful baby blue color. In the fall time, that color turns a hot red, and it is deciduous. It does lose those leaves. But whenever I planted some of these at a friend's house, this is one of my favorite plants. And whenever I moved to houses last year, one of my first shrubs that I planted was a Blue Shadow Fothergill. I really enjoy this plant. This is a plant also that you're going to see more of and more of, and I've seen it in 3 of the UT gardens. I think Crossville has it also. I know Knoxville, I think it's where I took this picture. I know Jackson has it. This is double play candy corn spirea. You talk about a fluorescent color in the landscape. Pink blooms. Here's a close-up of the blooms. But what's crazy is that full sun, it's a bright yellow plant. It just basically, whenever you're walking in the landscape, it just screams, look at me. So this is one of those plants that's a look at me type plant in the landscape. And I'll go back to the other one. This is double play candy corn spirea. And you can pretty much find a lot of the plants I've talked about, a lot of the box stores. Now, sometimes you will have to go hunting around to some other box stores because their inventory is not the same at every box store. One other spirea that I wanted to make mention of, and you can see this is growing next to a parking lot in West Tennessee. Hot, and it likes it in full sun. This is Spirea thunbergii, Ogon, and anytime you see the word Ogon, that means yellow pretty much. So it has yellow leaves. So in the white flowers in the springtime. So this is in the same family spirea as that last plant. We also see the old white flowering plant called bridal wreath. The blooms look similar to that bridal wreath spirea, but this one has bright yellow leaves, and it looks like giant pillows placed in the landscape of anywhere from 4 to 6 feet tall. This is a weed. This is tiger eyes sumac. And what's crazy is we're seeing some plant people really enjoy some of these native type weedy type plants that do better in the landscape than some of our plants that we've hybridized over the years. This is tiger eyes sumac, or it's also known as bale tiger. Bright yellow plant. It's deciduous, bright red leaves in the fall time. And you can kind of see this was in front of a library in Cookeville on Tennessee Tech's campus. The knockouts were starting to kind of look bad at the end of summer, but this tiger eye sumac really was a knockout plant in the landscape. And I really am always leaning toward a lot of these yellow type plants because I think they just draw our eye to them. Calycanthus, sweet shrub, bubby bush, whatever you call it. This was Aphrodite. And Aphrodite is a calycanthus and what sweet shrub because of the way the blooms smell. The blooms smell really heavenly, and I think we've got some different calycanthus. There's Aphrodite, Venus. There's a bunch of different species that you can actually buy. But if you read the tags on some of them, this calycanthus Aphrodite, I think most of the websites, like I Googled some of the websites today just to see what they thought how big these would get. And this one said 4 to 6 feet tall. This one was probably approaching 9 feet. So sometimes plants don't read their tags. So I think if you plant one of these calycanthus, make sure you give it plenty of room. There's also another great one called Heartledge Wine. All right, for you shade people, this is an Alyssium. This one's called Woodland Ruby. Now, what's cool about this plant is the blooms kind of hang upside down. And they look like a little octopus. Now, we have a lot of Alyssiums. They're called anise trees that do well in Tennessee. Florida Sunshine is another one that you'll see in a lot of garden centers. Banana Appeal is a yellow one, but this one is a dark green leaf one. The only drawback to this plant has cool leaves and has awesome flowers is the blooms smell like a rotting trout. That's the only drawback to that. So if you're a person who likes to have your windows up in the evening time, don't plant this under your windows so you're smelling this. We also see some great Lagerstromia species, which are crepe myrtles. And if you were on our previous talk about landscaping do's and don'ts, people top crepe myrtles. A lot of crepe myrtles. This one is a Forii species. They have beautiful bark. We just have to give them time to actually get large enough. That's with Dr. Andy Pulte at Knoxville. So don't be topping these crepe myrtles. We also see some shorter ones that would do well in the landscape. This is Pocomoke with Carol Reese. She's a UT Extension specialist in horticulture from West Tennessee. Now, Pocomoke, this is about 15 or 18 years old, is a dwarf crepe myrtle. But I wanted to show people most of the time the tags say 3 to 5 feet tall. It's probably approaching 6.5 feet right here and doesn't look like it's going to be stopping anytime soon. So they will put on a few inches every year. So always give these plants space. Even though it's a Pocomoke crepe myrtle, does not mean it needs to be placed every 3 feet in the landscape. They can get pretty large also. This is just one of the dwarf crepe myrtles. In the gardens over at the Master Gardener building in Wilson County, this is Major Wheeler lonicera, which is a honeysuckle. And you talk about a plant to draw in hummingbirds. There's one also in Fiddler's Grove in front of Town Hall. If you're trying to draw in some of these pollinators, and especially these butterflies and hummingbirds, this is a plant that pretty much blooms off and on all summer, but you really need to give it space. Sometimes people are scared about honeysuckles. Now, there are some invasive honeysuckles. Not all honeysuckles are invasive. When we talk about Japanese honeysuckle, bush honeysuckle, yes, those are not good plants to have in the landscape. This one is a good one, and it's pretty tidy as well, but it does need space to actually run so that you can get the full effect of it. One more kind of a vining type plant that has the ability to run on the wall. This is Boston ivy. And this is the golden form called Fenway Park. Now, Fenway Park was found, if you're a baseball person, which I had to look it up because I'm not really sure what baseball teams associated with Fenway Park because I'm more of a basketball person, but this is associated with Fenway Park in one of the baseball stadiums. A horticulturist saw it on the green monster, and it was a solid green wall of Boston ivy, and one branch was growing out yellow, so they named it Fenway Park. And I had an old bird bath that would not hold water in a previous home, so we had this vine running up it, and it really did look nice because whenever it come out in the springtime, it had these bright yellow leaves against that. My wife and I painted this bird bath blue. Little Henry Itea. Little Henry Itea is sweet spire, Virginia sweet spire. Look at the blooms on this plant. This was kind of going into summertime, toward the end of summertime. This thing is probably one of the most heavily florific flowering shrubs I've ever seen. But this one's called Little Henry. Little Henry, I think most of the websites say 3 or 4 feet tall. It's probably getting 5 feet tall right now. But it is a knockout if you're looking for a shrub that is a really killer blooming shrub. If you've got some shade, you may want to try out this false holly. This is called osmanthus. This is not a holly at all. If you're a person looking for more evergreen type plants with a different color hue on them, this one's called goshiki. Goshiki means 5 colors: red, pink, yellow, green, white. So it kind of looks like in the springtime, all the tips whenever they're coming out are red or pink. And then in the summertime, going in the fall time, it looks like someone took yellow and white paintbrushes and just splashed all of the leaves. That's where the name goshiki comes from. But this looks just like a holly, and if you were just walking by it, you would think it is a holly, but it's actually called an osmanthus, which is a false holly. Another holly is Whoa Nelly. I took these pictures in the middle of wintertime because sometimes wintertime just does not look good in our landscape. So we need to see something happy and cheery because wintertime in Middle Tennessee is just mud and rain, it seems like anymore. This is Whoa Nelly. And Whoa Nelly is a golden form of Nellie R. Stevens. It was actually found as a sport of Nellie R. Stevens, but it will get large. So this is not a small holly. This is not one that you probably should put next to your house. This is a larger holly that can get anywhere from 20 to 25 feet tall, and make sure you give it room. So if you've got a spot somewhere in your landscape and you're trying to find something unique to put it in, full sun, Whoa Nelly holly may be the plant for you. Kind of moving on with just a few conifers. I like a lot of these conifers, but any conifer that we see, we kind of need to make sure that it's growing well in Tennessee already. So if I go to some of the stores and I see Colorado blue spruces, a Colorado blue spruce does not grow well in Tennessee. It ideally needs to grow in Colorado. Alberta spruces are the same way. I see them for sale in every nursery, every garden center, every box store. Alberta spruces need to be grown in Canada. They don't need to be grown in Tennessee. So some of these will grow for a year or two, but they do not like the summer times in Tennessee. We have a lot of mite issues with some of these conifers. And what's great is the UT Gardens have killed a lot of these plants over the past few years just to kind of show you what grows well in Tennessee. And they've released lists of all these. So if you've never been to the UT Gardens in Jackson, in Crossville, and in Knoxville, go see what some of these conifers that are looking really well in the landscape, go see what they look like. Another, I don't even think I talked about that. This is Chinese juniper. This one is called Dobbs Frosted. Now, Dobbs Frosted is a sprawling one, 6 to 8 feet wide, but it only gets about a foot tall. So some of the junipers we see in the landscapes, people will put them in the landscape and they will cut to keep them smaller. If we just buy some of these smaller junipers that stay more prostrate on the ground, we're not going to have to cut. So this one's about a foot tall. This one's anywhere from 14 to 18 inches tall. This one is called Juniperus conferta, all gold. And I planted one of these in the front of my house in the past month because I love this little juniper. This is Juniperus conferta, all gold. Bright yellow leaves. You can kind of see where it's at in the landscape here. This is right next to a parking lot in West Tennessee. Hot, dry, and it seems to do well. The Groot Spire Arbor Vitae. We sometimes want plants for really tight spots, and we want them to stay skinny, and we want them to get tall because we see plants for sale. We see pictures of these Italian-type cypresses. Those don't grow well here in Tennessee. This is DeGroote Spire arborvitae. You're talking about a tight hugging arborvitae about 2 or 3 feet wide and grows anywhere from 10 to 12 feet tall. Now, they will get a little bit bigger sometimes if they're really happy. It can get taller, it can get a little bit wider. But if you're trying to find something to maybe put at the corner that you're not having to cut off your house, or if you're trying to put something around your mailbox, or maybe something to kind of guide your eye toward the door, this is some of the plants that we need to be using, as opposed to putting some of the larger plants and then cutting them. Another great plant that's native, this is the eastern red cedar. This one is a tight one. This one's called Taylor, just a few feet wide, and it will get tall like a cedar tree, but it will stay extremely tight. So a lot of these plants look like telephone poles. Landscapes are getting smaller, so we're trying to find plants that stay smaller, in these landscapes. I wanted to show you an eastern white pine that's also a columnar one. This one's called Stowe Pillar. Stowe Pillar stays really tight, but it grows straight up. One of my favorite native trees, this one is a deciduous one. This is Slender Silhouette Sweet Gum. I've got one I'm going to plant here at my house, and I can't wait to get it out. It gets anywhere from 6 to 8 feet wide, and it grows straight up like a telephone pole. I've started seeing these at some of the larger restaurants. We're starting to see them next to buildings and things. And these are going to be probably a really friendly type street tree, but they do still have those seed pods on them, those kind of spiky balls. They will have those also. But if we were trying to find something a little bit tighter, this is Slender Silhouette, discovered by Dawn Shadow in Tennessee. Kind of got just a few other plants I wanted to mention. Some of these are just great flowering plants. We see some great deciduous magnolias that are all blooming yellow. Elizabeth was kind of a standard. I took this picture at Cheekwood a couple of years ago. So some of the yellow flowering magnolias will bloom with the foliage on. So the foliage will come out, then they'll bloom, and then we have some that bloom with the foliage off. Now there's pros and cons to both of those. If we see some of these yellow flowering magnolias blooming without any foliage, what's the danger still? Frost. If we see them blooming with a lot of foliage on, some of the later flowering cultivars, we may not get the full effect of the bloom. When we look up yellow magnolias, there are a ton of different cultivars, and this was one that kind of blooms. This one was saved from frost a couple of years ago. This was at Cheekwood. A little sweet bay magnolia called Mattie Mae Smith, or Mardi Gras, is my favorite little variegated sweet bay magnolia. And in Tennessee, they're pretty much evergreen. It's not really a dense type tree. It has little white flowers and like a sweet bay magnolia. But what's great about it is this one has variegated foliage. It's yellow, and it kind of has that little green thumbprint down the center of it. Mattie Mae Smith, or Mardi Gras. I wanted to highlight some of. I've got 2 plants left, 2 newer cultivars. This is Flamethrower Redbud. Flamethrower Redbud has yellow top leaves. The newer leaves coming out are purple. And I took this picture going into fall time, so it wasn't at its peak. In the springtime, it would look better. And also, this was me a few years ago with the Rising Sun Redbud. I love redbuds. And if you're a Tennessean, you need to have a redbud in your yard because we see them everywhere. It's one of the plants that kind of symbolize springtime. And luckily, I got a great redbud for my property for my daughter from a group of great gardening people. But I wanted to highlight those 2 newer cultivars, the Rising Sun and Flamethrower. Now, that's actually, I got one other thing. If you're not in Wilson County, feel free to reach out to your county extension agent. If you've got any plant questions right now, feel free to email, and you can call their offices and leave voicemails. We're able to check our voicemails. Just go to utextension.tennessee.edu, and you'll scroll down, and on the right side of the screen, it'll say Find Your County Office. Just click on Find Your County Office. You click on your county, and it'll take you to your extension agents. So if you've got any horticulture type questions, family consumer science type questions, pasture, animal, agriculture, 4-H questions, feel free to reach out to them during this time because we're all still working. Let me stop